represent their Indian summary protected areas, nor does it represent anything against federal money going towards marine protected areas. Throw that one up there, but I'm really excited. All right, let's go. Hi everyone, my name is Catherine. Oh, huh? Stand on the recording there. Yep. Oh, okay. Hi everyone, my name is Catherine, and today I will be arguing for the affirmative side. We believe that more marine protected areas, also called MPA, should be designated by the U.S. federal government. And first, before we start, we'd like to give you some examples of what MPAs look like. So some examples include marine area, intertidal area, and mangrove forest. And there's a whole range of restrictions on MPA. It is not just simply very restrictive. It varies from wildlife conservation, such as no take of the wildlife, no human access to national parks, and all the way to sustainable use of natural resources and sustainable fishing practices. So what do we mean by more MPA? We feel like there should be more effective areas designated as MPA by the U.S. federal government. And we disagree that the amount of MPA should be reduced. And so our first argument is, why should we support more MPA protection under the U.S. federal government? Why not the state government or the local government? Well, this is because federal government has authority over individual citizens, corporations, and the state. So, for example, when a local or state law disagrees with the federal law, the supremacy clause will apply, and then this basically means that the federal government wins every time. And the federal government's role is to protect public interest, and one of the important public interests is environmental preservation. This is important for the public because by preserving the environment, we ensure that we have accountability to our future generations, and we will have secure food resources. Yes?
How do we know that the federal government will make the right decision when it comes to overriding state or local governments?
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. This is because federal government it has a role to protect the national interest, because they are designed to protect the United States. For example, a lot of people are voted into office, so they have to maintain the voting amount, and that's why they have accountability to the public. Okay, and so federal governments currently do regulate fishing, oil, and gas extortion from MPAs. However, they are not necessarily banning them. Less than 1% of U.S. water prohibit all types of extractive activities, and as of 2014, only 2% of the world's ocean are classified as MPA. One may argue that by the preservation of MPA may come in conflict with economic interests. However, this is not true, because first, the vast majority of the ocean is allowed for commercial activities, and second, MPA actually generate profit over long term, because there is preservation for the fishing stock, and tourism is extremely profitable, and it stimulates the local economy. Of course, not all MPAs are suitable for tourism, because many parts of the ocean has very delicate biodiversity. However, MPA serves as an important platform for fishing ground. That the world fish catch is actually declining. According to WWF, 2/3 of the world's fishing stock is in jeopardy of declining, and they are being overfished. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization has estimated that 70% of fishing population is fully used. So we have a crisis in the world right now, and MPA serves as a way to reduce this crisis by allowing fish to have a breeding ground and restock the population. And we just want to also emphasize coral reef fish. Currently, only 0.01% of the world's coral reef is effectively protected under MPA. And by increasing the amount of MPA, especially for coral reefs, it serves as an important breeding ground for tropical fish and for food resources. Currently, 30% of the world's coral reef is already damaged, and approximately 60% of the reef will be lost by 2030 if actions are not taken to recover and protect them. That's why this is very important to expand the amount of MPA available and to enforce this law. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Dave, and I'm going to be arguing on the opposite side. My team does not believe that we should add more marine protected areas. The federal government should not add more marine protected areas into U.S. waters. We don't believe that MPAs are as effective as our opponents make them out to be. They simply have not produced the tangible conservation benefits that they have described. For example, there's a marine protected area in Peru, the Paracas Bay Marine Area, and it's been a marine protected area for many, many years and has recently become a dead zone. What this shows is that these marine protected areas aren't as protected as our opponents claim they are. So when you have a marine protected area, it's essentially an imaginary line drawn in the water. Pollutants and other chemicals don't have a way of knowing where these lines will be drawn. Yes?
How does Peruvian and American policies on marine protected areas differ, and how might this impact the effect?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how they differ in terms of enforcement of the marine protected areas, but when it comes to pollution, it doesn't really matter how well you protect a single area if there's dumping allowed in other places. The pollutants can simply spread very easily through the water. Somebody have a question over here?
Yes.
Yes.
So how do you know that the dead zone is caused by MPA?
Well, it's not caused by the MPA, but what I'm saying is that the MPA isn't as effective as preventing ocean dead zones as you've made them out to be.
How do we know that the MPA came first before there was a dead zone?
Because it's been an MPA for many, many years. It was actually, it's a very old MPA apparently.
All right, thank you.
So I want to talk about how they don't provide tangible conservation benefits. So, like I said, these don't have any sort of physical barriers, and there's no way of protecting these fish from fishermen if you don't have a good way of enforcing them. Enforcement is very, very difficult for these areas, and that ties into how much these sort of areas will actually cost. Cost is a huge factor in these. According to the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, MPAs worldwide will cost between $2 and $19 billion to run. That's an enormous amount of money, or benefits that we don't feel are worth it, especially when we can use this money for other things. So when it comes to enforcement specifically, the Florida Marine National Sanctuary has a $6.6 million budget. And $2.3 million of that is used for enforcing its borders. A case study done by the NOAA showed that its enforcement is inefficient and ineffective. And if they're spending a third of their total budget on ineffective enforcement, what's the point? That money can be used in other, better ways. We don't believe that these sorts of approaches to protecting the environment will work in the long term. Finally, how are we to say that the government is the final arbiter, the end-all, be-all decider of how these MPAs will be put into effect? So, like I mentioned earlier in my question, how do we know that the federal government will make the right choice when it comes to overruling local and state governments? When it comes to our fishermen, it's a huge profit, and these people live their lives fishing. And in hard economic times, when there aren't many jobs on the mainland, all they have is fishing. So if you take away these large tracts of water and just completely stop anyone from working there and making a living there, then that's only going to hurt our economy. So secondly, there's an example in the Indian Ocean. In the British Indian Ocean territories, there was a Chagos archipelago, and this was designated as a marine protected area. Later, WikiLeaks revealed correspondence between the UK and US government that showed that the reason they wanted to designate this as a marine protected area was to remove and expel the indigenous population. So this shows an example of MPAs being used as a tool for imperialism. And the US government has a military base on this archipelago, and our interests, our military interests, were of course protected at the cost of the environment, which was the whole point of making this MPA anyway. How do we know that the government is going to make the right decision, especially when it's been shown that they have ignored whatever sort of environmental reason they set out to make that MPA in order to protect their own economic and military interests. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lauren, and I will be expanding on my partner's arguments in light of some of the claims that my opponent has made. My partner has already laid out our basic arguments. Firstly, I'd like to point out that 41% of the United States' waters are currently designated as some kind of MPA, but only 8% of that area is focused on conserving our natural and cultural resources. It's important to note that, yes.
Then what's the point of having that much land designated as an MPA?
I'm getting to that. It is important to note that there is a huge variety in the purpose of MPAs and regulations placed on MPAs. Some are subject to far more protection than others. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the NOAA, has come up with a system for classifying MPAs based on type of protection, along with the permanence and consistency of that protection. 92% of MPAs are classified as uniform multiple use. This designation means that a variety of human activities are allowed, including extraction of fish and natural resources. There may be some restrictions on specific natural resources, so that is the purpose of those areas. But for the large part, extraction restrictions are low. When I say extraction, I'm referring to the removal of marine life and other natural resources in that area. Now, what about the other 8% of MPA area? There are a variety of designations put in place by the NOAA. Some are designated as no-take, which means absolutely all extraction of natural resources is prohibited, but human activity, even activity that may be potentially harmful, is allowed. Some are no-impact. This is a step up from no-take protection. This prohibits all activities that may be harmful. And the highest level of restriction is no access. And these zones prohibit all human activity, period. 7% of MPAs are no-take, while no-impact and no-access zones make up less than 1% of MPA area. As for the consistency of protection, some areas are only designated as MPAs during certain times of year, while others are more permanent. Some areas are meant to protect an entire ecosystem, while others are meant to target a single resource, habitat, or species complex. For my opponents to complain that all MPAs are a waste of money is completely ludicrous. There is actually very little data available about how much MPAs of various classifications cost to run. Also, for my opponents to complain that MPAs aren't effective at all is just as ridiculous of a claim, especially considering the fact that most MPAs have weak restrictions to begin with and just need better enforcement. But yes.
Would it not make more sense to set stricter restrictions?
Stricter restrictions in the areas that
already designated areas rather than designating ones.
Yeah, I agree that we do need stricter restrictions on areas that are already designated, in addition to new ones. Just because we have one doesn't mean we can't have the other as well. The fact of the matter is that they are effective when given proper restrictions. Because since the 80s, fish habitats have been decimated, especially near coastal areas. And MPAs with no-take reserves allow resident fish populations to recover, and then recovered populations of mobile fish might spill over into other areas where fishing is allowed. According to a paper published in Science, a network of 5 reserves were established along the coast of St. Lucia to rehabilitate the decimated reef fishing environment. Immediately after the creation of reserves, fishermen reported having to put more effort into catching the same amount of fish. However, 5 years later, total catch per trip had increased between 46 and 90%, depending on fishing gear used. In other words, total biomass nearly doubled in fishing areas adjacent to the reserve. Even though there was a 35% decrease in the area of the fishing ground, fishermen were still rewarded with the benefit of there being more fish in the area. Where is the downside to this result? Well, it costs more money to enforce restrictions in MPAs, possibly, but there's clearly a payoff. Another example of this is is George's Bank, an area between Massachusetts and Nova Scotia. After the implementation of such reserves, there was a 5-fold increase in haddock populations, 14-fold increase in scallop populations, and an 800% increase in yellow-tailed flounder populations. I'd like to mention we have a moral obligation to not screw up our planet completely. We share this planet with billions of organisms, it's their world too. And we need to use our power over them responsibly, and establishing a greater amount of effective MPAs is one way of doing that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Iman. I'm going to expand upon the points made by my partners. So just to expand on some of the alternative solutions we propose, first of all, we want to impose stricter fishing regulations. Now, these regulations would not only affect the tiny area, it would affect all of the shores. So they would actually, we think, would have more of an effect because it would not only reduce fishing in a small area, it would expand to larger areas. Also, we need to find better fishing solutions. We need to research into different fishing methods that reduce bycatch. Because right now, the current fishing methods we have not only catch fish that we want, such as tuna and salmon, we are catching a lot of other things like dolphins, turtles. We need to find ways to reduce this. Also, we propose greener energy, such as solar power and wind power, because carbon emissions are currently leading to ocean acidification, which is threatening coral reefs, a problem which would not be solved simply by putting down an MPA. Also, we need to reduce runoff from farms, especially in sort of the Midwest area where corn production is very large, because this runoff is currently actually leading to one of the major dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is another threat that needs to be resolved if we want to have a major impact on the ocean. Another good solution is a good model for sustainable fish farming is the small fish farm off of the southern Spain. It's called Veta La Palma. This is a very good ecological model. It is a reformed marsh, which is now using a fish farm and bird sanctuary. It approximately houses about 200 different species of birds and is also very effective. It has completely reversed previous ecological damages that exist there when the marsh was originally destroyed. So we need to have more examples such as this. Furthermore, we just need more research, because without research, even if we do have more MPAs, this is another question I posed to my opponents, is how do you know where you are placing these will be effective? One of my best examples is the Hawaiian monk seal, which is something that they were trying to protect and was a very endangered species. They did place an MPA close to shore, which was the supposed feeding grounds. However, after further research, we realized that this is not where they fed, so the MPA was completely useless in protecting the desired species. Furthermore, if we do want to protect species, we need to imply regulations that protect species and not the area, because many of these animals will migrate, so protecting them in one small area will not help them in their overall progress. Furthermore, there's also, again, with coral reefs, not only is fishing a threat to them, such as collateral damage from dredging, also the pet trade, which uses practices such as cyanide and dynamite to collect both corals and fish, which are very, very destructive methods. So I propose that there need to be more coral breeders and researchers discovering how to breed these, so we do not need to collect them constantly from the wild. For instance, I would suggest for supporting this one program called DIBS, which is a program specifically designed to help figure out how to breed in captivity many different species of invertebrates. However, currently this program solely operates on the money of the personal income of its participants. However, with funding, I do believe they would be able to discover many, many different ways to captively reproduce different organisms. They've already successfully reproduced shrimp, corals, snails, many other species that are under threat, so I do believe programs like this could use more funding, which would help protect more research.
Okay guys, so those were our first 4 speeches. So we're going to open up the poll again. See if any of you have changed your answers. So if you have your smartphones on you, please get them out, and we will do another poll everywhere. So I'm going to keep the same one up. I'm going to grab my phone. Oh, it says we can't vote anymore. Well, I'm a silly woman. Okay, so I'm going to start up a new poll really quickly. Thank you, Dr. Sarvery, for introducing me to Poll Everywhere. Okay. And so we're just going to get this one set up. Ooh, Poll Everywhere. All right, guys, so a new set of phone numbers. So before it was 11 to 5, so let's see how we're doing now.
Yeah!
Sure. I have the table turned. We're about to do good stuff.
All right, guys, we're going to give maybe another minute for voting, and then we're going to close the poll. Okay. Well, thank you, debaters. Maybe you want to hide your eyes from that just so that, you know. Okay. Hi, everyone. First, I'd like to respond to their criticism about how we did not mention the enforcement part. They argue that it is almost impossible to monitor the protection. However, with modern technology, this is possible. Currently, remote sensing technology, satellites and drones are regularly being used to monitor MTA areas. And with increasing usage of technologies, this will be cheaper. Yes.
Cheaper? Increasing use of technologies that cost billions of dollars, like drones and satellites?
What I mean is that with time, such technology will get cheaper. Okay, and also, in response to their claim of the Peru dead zone, we don't know. They did claim that MT was placed in before that it became a dead zone. However, we don't know if this is caused by the MT in placement or the lack of enforcement, since they said that it was placed many years ago.
The dead zone that is in Peru was caused by the overfishing and the processing of fish that led to excess pollution. It was not due to a lack of food.
Okay, thank you for the comments. And they also said that fishermen do not like MTA, and this is understandable because it hurts their short-term economic interests. However, over long term, this actually benefits the fishing industry because MTA could serve as areas for fishing breeding ground and therefore conservation of fishing stock. And also, they mentioned that MTA serve as a tool for imperialism. Such claim is very far-stretched because this could be just an exception. It is not the norm. Most of the MTA in place are not in place with the intention to control the local population or expand colonialism. So that argument is very questionable. And as for their alternative enforcement and solutions they have proposed, we do agree that there should be better fishing enforcement and research should be looked into better fishing methods. And also we agree that green technology should be used to reduce ocean acidification. However, all of which takes time and money, which is very important because right now they argue that MTA takes a lot of money. However, research takes even more money and more time. And also, we don't know, also like in terms of global warming reduction, this is an international effort. It is not just a U.S. domestic effort that could solve the problem. And so it is very difficult politically to enforce green technology onto other countries. And also, furthermore, this asks us the question of how does the United States have the power to make sure other countries follow the energy guidelines. And they mentioned that coral reef breeder could potentially reduce coral harvest, and this may be true. But however, if there's no protected area such as MPAs, how would a wild coral reef grow? How could we protect species without giving them habitat to live? So overall, we agree with many of their alternative solutions that they have proposed. However, our old argument was that there should be more effective and larger amount of MPAs, which we still hold. Yes.
You mentioned that species can survive once they get their habitat to grow. Like, you also cited before that only 2% of the ocean is protected by marine protected areas. So are you arguing that the species that aren't in the marine protected areas right now cannot survive?
Of course not. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying that by increasing the amount of MPAs, we could better protect species, such as coral reef. Yeah.
Is NPA the most direct way to help the marine ecology?
This really depends because sometimes you could just enforce laws to reduce fertilizer overrun and protect a certain marine area. However, like compared with reduction of global warming, NPA is definitely a better alternative because it requires less political collaboration and it is like more direct. Yes. Okay, my time is up, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, so I'd like to cover some topics that our opponents brought up and some questions that were brought up. First, the biggest thing that they brought up was that only 8% or of 92% of the MPAs are called, what was it? It's called uniform multiple use. What I hear when I hear this is that 92% of MPAs are entirely pointless. What are the regulations that are on these specific areas, and what's the point of having them? What's the point of spending money to enforce areas that don't really have any enforcement on them? Secondly, they talked about climate change in general, and it's true. Solving climate change is going to be a decades-long, generations-long, lots of money way to solve problems. But we argue that MPAs are a band-aid solution. When it comes to actually solving the problems of endangered species and overfishing, we need to solve the causes of these problems, not the symptoms. We need to treat the source of these problems, which is climate change, which is pollution, which is finding some sort of alternative food sources that we can use that won't be so overfished.
How is the source of overfishing climate change?
Well, you have fewer species, and as the species level decline, like overfishing only hurts that, right? So if you're losing fish to climate change, and you're continuing to fish the same amount, you're going to overfish.
It sounds like two causes for the same problem, though.
But what I'm arguing is that MPAs won't solve that problem, because you don't have good enforcement on them.
They'll solve half the problem.
Yeah.
So, are you saying that we should focus on solving the global warming crisis right now rather than, and that we should remove MPAs?
Not that we should, interesting question. Removing MPAs, that's an entirely different question. But what we do argue is not to add any more. I'm saying that we already are spending a lot of money on stuff that we don't feel is worth it. So maybe add better enforcement to the MPAs that we have now, but don't add any more. It's only going to be a waste of money. Yeah?
So not EPA, how do you expect to recover?
So what we'd like to focus on is instead of protecting an area, protect the species that are endangered. So you have a species that's endangered, you can put fishing regulations and we can protect the species specifically rather than an area that they may or may not be in. Yeah?
You just said fishing regulations. How are you going to enforce fishing regulations?
So fishing regulations will also be difficult to enforce, but the point is that MPAs cost a lot more money than any sort of enforcing fishing regulations. So when you find someone who has a fish, that's going to be a lot easier to find than somebody who just like happens to be in some part of the water somewhere. I'd also like to talk about the government as the sole arbiter again is going to be a bad idea. Because when you have only the federal government included in the decision-making process about these MPAs, you're ignoring the fishermen who have a right to be interested in these areas. Because regardless of whether or not this is sort of like a private economic concern, it's still important to us because we're not saying that only money should matter, but that the livelihood of people should be included in the decision-making process about MPAs. Also, we argued before what was the most effective way to stop fishing, and again, that has to do with protecting species rather than using MPAs. So another question that Catherine asked was, what right do we have to police other people's waters? That's a good question, and the answer is that we have a right because fish don't have political or national affiliations. Fish that are in danger, when it comes to these fish that are in danger, we need to protect them, and we need to do it nationally and globally and not restricted to any single government solution. And last but not least, we need to talk about how tourism was brought up as an economic solution. How is a tourism industry going to completely replace the money that's brought in from the fishing industry? That's a question I'd like to leave that with. Thank you.
I'd like to first address my opponent's point about tourism that he left off with. I don't believe we said tourism is going to completely replace the amount of money expended on enforcing MPAs, but it will generate some income since, yes, tourists prefer, especially scuba divers, they greatly prefer diving in beautiful areas that aren't decimated by our activities that may have harmed those areas. My opponents brought up some other interesting points. They're talking about implementing fishing restrictions. First of all, I'd like to know, yes?
I'm a little confused about the point you're making. Before you were citing that we should definitely protect areas that are overfished, but now you're citing that areas that are important for tourism should also be targeted. Are you saying that we should only target areas that are good for tourism, or just blindly shoot?
I believe we should target both because MPAs, as defined in the beginning of this debate, do have a variety of usage, whether it's protecting the marine life and resources that are found within them, or protecting the natural heritage of the area. You know, and divers do like to experience that for themselves. So, you're welcome. And my opponents are talking about implementing fishing restrictions, and I'd like to know, where are they getting this data that fishing restrictions are so much cheaper than MPAs? And furthermore, I don't believe, yes?
It comes with the ability to enforce things. So you find someone with a fish, that's a lot easier to say, okay, you have this fish, you're getting a fine, rather than you're in this part of the water, you're on a boundary of maybe an MPA, you have half the fine. It's easier to enforce, is the answer.
Or do you have actual numbers for that, or are you just projecting? Because if I saw someone in an area of water, I could say, you're fishing in this area, you shouldn't be there, as opposed to going up to their boat, checking what kind of fish they have, and then fining them. Also, I'd like to point out that, you know, if you just want to protect certain species, that's not always the best option, because if you go fishing into an area, the very physical nature of you being there and putting hooks into that area, putting nets into that area, and spinning the propeller on your boat is going to disturb the area, and it might disturb species that you don't intend to disturb. And also, yes?
That was the entire point of the argument of how we need to find better, more ecologically safe fishing things so that we can still have the fish we desire, but we would not be causing so much ecological destruction.
Okay, and then you went on to talk about how we should only be focusing on protecting certain species and not others, because that would be cheaper. And I'm pointing out we should be protecting all species in these MPAs. That's the whole point of them. My opponents also claim that we spend money to, and I quote, we're spending money to enforce something that is poorly enforced. In these areas that have poor enforcement, there's obviously not that much money being spent. The more expensive ones are the ones that do have proper enforcement and do have positive benefits, as shown by the two examples I provided, one being the reserves in St. Lucia, increasing fishermen's yields in surrounding areas, and the second example being Georges Bank. These were MPAs that had proper enforcement on them, and we experienced the benefits as a result. So I'd just like to conclude our argument on the affirmative side by saying that we are connected to the environment in which we live in so many more ways than we realize, and it is our responsibility to preserve that environment for us and for our children to enjoy in the same way that we have. Despite all that havoc that we've wreaked on our ocean so far, the environment does have the ability to rebound if we let it, and we believe that establishing a greater amount of effective marine protected areas is a very practical method of accomplishing this goal. Thank you.
Okay, just to wrap up a few other points to make, one of the comments that my opponents make is that using other solutions such as stricter fishing regulations would take too long. However, the example I already mentioned, which was Veta La Palma, this was able to rebound in a very short time and did not take decades. However, I would also like to pose that slapping an MPA in a small area on the map is also going to take a tremendous amount of time. However, we must do something. And as we already mentioned, many of the MPAs are ineffective. For instance, the other 92% that are not being used for ecological benefit, these are not going to be helping the massive area. And furthermore, about how we only want to protect certain species, how we do need to choose the species we protect carefully. For instance, keystone species. These are species that are known that should their population be affected, it would cause major cascades in the rest of the ecology. For instance, sea otters, kelp, there are many different examples of species that need specific protection in order to keep their entire ecosystem in place. So that is a way we can protect the entire ecosystem without causing massive costs. And then, furthermore, as for the cost of, yes?
So I agree with the points that you're making, but in terms of the value of marine protected areas, for attracting this attention to marine conservation concerns. Because my impression is that people care more when they hear something about a national park versus hunting regulations, which you say that's synonymous with marine protected areas and fishing regulations. What I'm trying to say is how important are marine protected areas to making people care about marine conservation?
Well, as I do believe that marine protected areas are important for making people care, couldn't we also use this to, instead of making more of the same semi-effective marine protected areas, couldn't we also argue about how we can advocate for improving pre-existing marine protected areas, and that could also spark interest. And then, furthermore, I do believe that also, although it is important to gather the attention of the population, we would also need to make sure it's not just something to get the attention of the public and also is causing actual change. Furthermore, as for the cost, addressing the cost of stricter fishing regulations, the things we can use to enforce stricter fishing regulations can be tacked on to pre-existing programs such as the lifeguard, coast guard, other ecological officers that exist. For instance, another example could be more sustainable farming or fish farming regulations, and this could be used through health inspectors, which already exist. As a program, we could simply add some sort of ecological or green requirement that they must pass to have it farmed. So we can just add other requirements to pre-existing programs, which would not result in an tremendous increase in cost, where to create a marine protected area would have much more resources needed to do it. So furthermore, as you've already stated, as many of the marine protected areas are, they are ineffective, and so instead of expanding them, we should work on reinforcing and improving our pre-existing marine protected areas, research, the alternative solutions we already mentioned. Furthermore, education, as Taylor brilliantly bring up, we need to get the interest of the public. We need to put protecting the ocean in the focus of the public through education. This needs to be in the forefront of our minds, and that is definitely important. And also, the MPA would not stop, as we mentioned, this is a global issue. However, an MPA would only have a very small local solution. However, some of the other problems such as global warming, runoff, pollution, many of these other things can carry beyond the coast of the United States. So we do need to address these other issues, for it would not only affect our local fish populations, but the global ones as well. Okay.